Finally, it was time for God's people to enter the promised land. But first, they had to cross the Jordan River. There were no bridges or boats. God told the priests to carry the holy box and walk into the water. When they did, God made a dry path, and his people walked across to the other side of the river. The first city they came to was Jericho. It had huge walls and gates and guards everywhere. God said,
"March around Jericho every day for 6 days. 7 priests with trumpets must march at the front. On the 7th day, march around 7 times. Then have the priests blow one long blast on their trumpets. The people must shout, and the walls will fall down."
The people obeyed, and down came the walls. Joshua fought hard to win the land God had promised to his people. And God helped him. One time, God even sent huge hailstones to fall on the enemy. During that same battle, Joshua said,
"Sun, stand still!"
and God kept the sun right where it was until his people finally won the battle.
One of the leaders of God's people was chosen before he was born. An angel told the mother,
"You will have a son, but you must never cut his hair. His long hair will show that he's a Nazirite, someone who has work to do for God."
This baby grew up to be very strong. His name was Samson. And he always won against his enemies. Samson had a friend named Delilah. She asked,
"What makes you so strong, Samson?"
At first, he wouldn't tell her. She begged and whined. Finally, he said,
"If someone shaved my head, I would lose my strength."
When Samson fell asleep, Delilah had someone shave off his hair. Samson wasn't strong anymore. Now his enemies had no trouble taking him to their prison. In prison, Samson's hair grew long again. One night, his enemies had a party. They brought Samson in and made fun of him. Samson prayed,
Lord, please, give me strength one more time.
and God did. When Samson pushed against the pillars that held up the building, down it all came on top of everyone. Those people would never hurt anyone again. Ruth and Naomi were widows. That means their husbands had died. Young Ruth had been married to Naomi's son. One day, Naomi decided to go back home to Israel where she was born. Ruth wanted to go with her. Naomi feared that Ruth would miss her family and friends, so she told Ruth not to come. But Ruth said,
Please, don't ask me to leave you. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God.
and so they went together. But Ruth and Naomi were very poor. They didn't have enough to eat. Naomi was too old to work, so Ruth went out to a rich man's field to gather leftover grain for food. One day, the rich man named Boaz saw Ruth. She was a beautiful young woman.
Stay here. Work in my field.
Naomi decided Boaz would be a good husband for Ruth. So she came up with a plan to find out if Boaz wanted to marry Ruth. That night, Ruth went to the field where Boaz had been working hard all day. He was sleeping beside a pile of grain, and Ruth quietly laid down at his feet. About midnight, Boaz woke up suddenly and rolled over. He was startled. There was a woman lying near his feet.
Ruth, is that you?
Yes, I am Ruth, your servant. Please spread your cover over me if you want to take care of me.
Boaz was pleased.
The Lord bless you, Ruth. Your kindness to me is great. Everyone knows you are a very good woman.
Boaz loved Ruth and asked to marry her. After they were married, Ruth had a little boy, which made all of them very happy. As a young boy, Samuel was sent to help Eli the priest in doing the Lord's work. One night, Samuel ran to where Eli was sleeping. Samuel had heard someone call his name, and he thought it was Eli.
I didn't call you. Go back to bed.
So Samuel went back to bed, but the voice called him 2 more times. After the 3rd time, Eli knew that God was calling Samuel. Eli told Samuel that it must be God speaking.
Next time you hear the voice, say, "Speak, Lord. I'm listening."
God told Samuel that he was going to punish Eli's sons because they were evil. Samuel grew up to be a godly man. A war broke out, and God's people decided to take the holy box into battle. But this went against God's rules. Guess what? The enemy captured the holy box of God and took it home with them. God's people were sad. As soon as the enemy got the holy box of God home, bad things started happening to them. They wanted to get rid of it. They put the holy box in a cart pulled by 2 cows and sent it home. When God's people saw the holy box coming, they were so happy. The enemy wasn't quite through yet. They saw God's people meeting together and decided to attack them. The people begged Samuel to pray. When he did, God sent a thunderclap so loud, it frightened the enemy soldiers. Then, God's people chased them away.
Samuel had become a prophet. God sent him to the house of a man named Jesse to choose a new king for Israel. When Samuel looked at 7 of Jesse's sons, God said to him,
Don't look at how tall or handsome they are.
Are these all of your sons?
My youngest son is taking care of the sheep. His name is David.
God said to Samuel,
David is the one I have chosen.
but David was just a boy serving his father as a shepherd. It was his job to protect and care for sheep. While he was with the sheep, he used to make up songs and sing them to God. One of those songs says,
The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything that I need.
As David watched the sheep, he became close friends with God. God's Holy Spirit came to be with David, making him brave and strong. One day, Jesse sent his son David to go check on his brothers, who were soldiers. When David got to the battlefield, he found the Israelite soldiers were all afraid of a giant named Goliath. Goliath liked to yell at the soldiers and scare them. He wanted to hurt them. But David wasn't afraid of Goliath. He gathered 5 small, smooth stones and put them in his pouch. Then, with his slingshot in one hand, David went to meet Goliath. The giant laughed when he saw that David was just a boy. But David shot a stone from the slingshot. It hit Goliath in the head and killed him. By killing the giant Goliath, David became a hero. God's people loved him. But King Saul became jealous of David. King Saul had a son named Jonathan, who was a prince of Israel and David's best friend. King Saul told Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. So Jonathan decided to warn his friend.
My father is looking for a chance to kill you, but I have a plan. Tomorrow morning, you hide behind that big rock. I'll come out with my bow and pretend to shoot at a target. Then I'll send a boy to find the arrows. If I say to him, "No, you've gone too far. The arrows are closer to me," that means you are safe. But if I say, "Go farther. The arrows went past the big rock," that means my father won't change his mind, and you are in danger.
So David hid behind the rock. Saul and Jonathan were nearby. The king was very angry with his son.
Jonathan, don't you know that as long as David is alive, you'll never be king? He must die!
But father, David has done nothing wrong.
Then Saul threw his spear at Jonathan, trying to kill his own son. So Jonathan and his servant ran away toward the big rock. Jonathan said to the boy,
"Run and find this arrow."
When the boy ran toward the rock, Jonathan shot the arrow way beyond the rock and called out,
"Go further. The arrows went past you."
So David knew the news was bad. When the boy left, David came out and hugged his dear friend. Even though they were grown men, they were both crying. But David cried the most.
David, my friend, go in peace. We have been promised by the Lord that you and I and all our descendants will be friends forever.
Years later, Jonathan and his father died in a battle against Israel's enemy, and David became king. Because of his great friendship with Jonathan, King David took care of Jonathan's crippled son Mephibosheth for the rest of his life. After Samuel, David, and Solomon died, God's people were split into two kingdoms, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. The ruler of Israel was King Ahab, who did many things that God said were wrong. He worshipped idols and did more evil than any king before him. So God sent Elijah, the prophet, to teach Ahab a lesson.
Ahab, God says there will be no rain for many years.
This made Ahab very angry. Elijah had to run away from Ahab and camp near a brook. God sent birds to bring the prophet food. When the brook dried up, God told Elijah to go ask a certain woman for food.
I only have enough left for one meal for me and my son.
But Elijah said,
Cook for me first, and you'll be all right.
When she obeyed, God did a miracle. She didn't run out of food for 3 years. After those 3 years passed with no rain, God told Elijah to go meet King Ahab.
There you are, you troublemaker.
But it was really the king who caused the trouble.
Let's see whose God is real.
So the king's prophets built one altar to their God, and Elijah built an altar to his God. They put offerings on each of them. Then they prayed and waited to see whose God would answer their prayers by sending fire to burn up the sacrifice. The king's prophets screamed at their fake gods to send fire. No fire came. Elijah teased.
Pray louder. Your God must be sleeping.
They did. But nothing happened. When they stopped, Elijah had water poured over everything on the altar he'd built. Then he prayed to God in heaven to send fire. Fire came down. It burnt up the offering, the stones, and the water. Then the people knew that Elijah's God was the most powerful of all. The land of Babylon was ruled by the king of Persia. But God's people were still living in Babylon. One of them was a young woman named Esther. The king of Persia wanted a beautiful young woman to be his queen. And he chose Esther. About this time, Esther's cousin Mordecai got in trouble.
Hey, Mordecai. Here comes General Haman. You better bow down to the leader of the king's army.
No, I will only bow down to the God of my fathers.
This made Haman so angry that he made a plan to kill all God's people living in Persia. Neither Haman nor the king knew that Queen Esther was related to Mordecai, or even that she was one of God's people. So the king agreed to Haman's evil plan. When Mordecai found out about the plan, he went secretly to visit the queen.
You must go to the king and beg him to have mercy on our people.
But I have not been called to the king. Anyone who enters his throne room without permission will be killed. Unless he holds out his gold scepter.
Yes, you may be killed. But who knows? You may have been chosen queen for just such a time as this.
The young woman had a big decision to make. One that could get her killed, or it could save God's people.
All right. Tell all God's people to stop eating and start praying for me. I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I die, I die.
So Esther put on her royal robes and went to see the king. When the king's servants saw her, they were afraid she would be put to death. But when the king saw Esther, he was very pleased. Slowly, he held out his gold scepter.
What is it, my queen? What do you want to ask me?
My king, I ask that you have mercy on me and my people, the Jews. Haman wants us all to be killed.
And that day, the king decided to save Esther and all God's people from Haman's evil plan.
God's people were captured and taken away to the country of Babylon. The king of that country was named Nebuchadnezzar. 3 young Israelites, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, worked for King Nebuchadnezzar.